Stop. Don't sign that. Jordan's small voice cut sharply through the polished boardroom, echoing off the high ceilings lined with recessed lighting. The room froze, pins hovering midair, tablets flickering, and the air thick with disbelief. Mr. Whitman, a sharply dressed CEO with a steel gray suit and an impeccable posture, blinked, his coffee forgotten on the glossy table, the rich aroma mingling with the sudden tension. Jordan, a 9-year-old black boy with a tattered backpack slung over one shoulder and worn sneakers scuffed from city streets, stood firm, eyes locked on the unfolding contract. His hands, small but steady, rested on the yellowed parchment, tracing the faint Latin letters as if they whispered secrets only he could understand. Around him, the staff shuffled uneasily, whispers darting like fireflies in the dimmed light, trying to mask their shock. Jordan's brow furrowed, lips pressing into a thin line, and he began to read, his voice confident yet calm, each word a precise note against the murmur of disbelief, the ancient clauses rolling effortlessly off his tongue. The CEO's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, caught between authority and astonishment, as a slow realization began to spread across his face. Ms. Langford, the firm's head attorney, paled subtly, the practiced mask of composure cracking under the weight of the truth. The digital clock on the wall ticked audibly, every second stretching the tension, and for a heartbeat, the entire room seemed suspended, breathing held, awaiting the outcome. Jordan's reading didn't waver. He highlighted the subtle traps hidden in the margins, the loopholes that could have cost millions, the sentences arranged so cunningly that any adult would miss them. The staff leaned forward, pens forgotten, eyes wide, capturing the impossible with phones raised in disbelief. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, feeling the magnitude of the revelation settle like a weight he hadn't anticipated, his mind racing through decades of experience, realizing that the tiniest figure in the room now held knowledge that could undo his most carefully laid plans. The boy's fingers lingered over the final clause, a tiny pulse of confidence radiating from him, the worn wristband catching the soft light, a symbol of resilience and sharp intelligence against the backdrop of corporate power. Every eye was drawn to him, a mix of admiration and shock, the room silent save for the faint scratching of pens and the shuffle of paper, the ancient contract now fully illuminated under the boy's mastery. And as Jordan finished, a subtle pause hung in the air, a silent invitation for the adults to decide how to respond, leaving a question lingering. Could the CEO trust this homeless child's insight, or had the room just witnessed the beginning of a change no one expected? Mr. Whitman leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes flicking repeatedly between the ancient document and Jordan, who remained standing with a calm intensity that belied his small frame. The room, once filled with subtle murmurs and rustling papers, had fallen into a tense silence, each staff member holding their breath as if the next word might alter their reality. Jordan's gaze did not waver. His dark brown eyes, sharp and observant, swept over the intricate lettering once more, tracing connections and patterns that no one else had noticed. The boy's voice, now lower and measured, explained the nuances of the contract, the hidden clauses that could shift financial liabilities, the subtle language designed to mislead. Mr. Whitman's brow furrowed, not in anger but in astonishment, as the weight of comprehension settled over him. He could feel decades of experience colliding with the raw clarity of Jordan's insight. Ms. Langford, standing near the polished oak table, straightened her posture, lips pressed tightly, her mind racing to reconcile the boy's knowledge with her own oversight. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting narrow stripes of golden light across the room, illuminating the dust motes that danced slowly in the quiet. The subtle hum of the air conditioning mixed with the soft scratching of a pen as one of the junior associates cautiously took notes, hesitant to breathe too loudly and break the fragile tension. Jordan, holding his hands gently on the contract, elaborated on the implications of each clause, the potential consequences if overlooked, and the way a simple misreading could unravel the deal entirely. His voice carried authority that seemed impossible for a boy of his age, each word deliberate, punctuated by careful pauses to allow the gravity to register. Mr. Whitman's chest rose and fell slowly, absorbing every detail, the CEO, silently acknowledging that the boy's intervention was not merely helpful but essential. The staff exchanged glances, a mixture of disbelief and admiration passing silently across the room, while the weight of the revelation settled in every corner. Jordan's stance was unwavering, his small hands steady, the tattered backpack hanging lightly from his shoulder, a quiet emblem of resilience and intelligence. The air seemed heavier, thick with anticipation, as Mr. Whitman finally spoke, his voice measured and thoughtful, yet carrying the unmistakable edge of respect. "Jordan, show me again the part that changes everything." Jordan nodded subtly, leaning slightly over the parchment, pointing to a line written in a faded, almost imperceptible script, his eyes alight with focus and purpose. In that moment, the room was suspended, a fragile balance between disbelief and revelation, every individual silently acknowledging that a boy, so young and unassuming, had turned the tide of understanding in the span of mere seconds. The soft click of a pen, the faint rustle of papers, and the subtle creak of the chair underscored the gravity of the moment, the golden sunlight stretching longer as the late afternoon moved inexorably forward, leaving the room poised on the edge of a profound decision, the outcome hanging delicately between the boy's unwavering knowledge and the adults who had underestimated him until now. Jordan carefully lifted the final page of the ancient contract, the delicate parchment trembling slightly under his fingers, and held it out so Mr. Whitman could see the line that no adult had noticed, the words almost invisible in the faded ink, but perfectly clear to his trained eye. The CEO leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, the polished surface of the table reflecting the intense afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows, highlighting dust particles that floated slowly in the golden beams, each one a silent witness to the moment. Jordan's voice remained calm and precise as he explained the implications of the overlooked clause, the subtle phrasing that could have shifted entire negotiations if left unchecked, and each word he spoke was measured to ensure that everyone in the room understood the gravity of the situation. Ms. Langford, who had moments before attempted to assert control, now stepped back slightly, her arms crossed, lips pressed tightly, unable to deny the clarity and authority emanating from the small boy before her. The junior associates scribbled notes furiously, their pens scratching lightly against the paper, the only audible sound besides the faint hum of the air conditioning, the room holding its collective breath as Jordan traced the historical context of the language, the unusual grammar, and the carefully embedded terms that required a precise reading to prevent costly misinterpretation. Mr. Whitman's eyes narrowed, processing the revelation, a mixture of astonishment and grudging admiration crossing his face, while his fingers tapped lightly against the table, a rhythmic counterpoint to the boy's deliberate cadence. Jordan's dark brown eyes met the CEO's, unwavering and steady, conveying a quiet confidence that demanded acknowledgement, and for a moment, the boardroom felt suspended in time, every person acutely aware of the intelligence and composure displayed by someone so young and overlooked. He highlighted the potential traps, the ambiguities intentionally embedded to mislead, and suggested the corrective measures needed to ensure that the contract would serve the intended purpose without risk, each recommendation delivered with the precision of someone who had studied the document as if it were second nature. The tension in the room gradually shifted from disbelief to admiration as the adults began to grasp that this small boy, homeless and underestimated, had illuminated complexities that none of them had seen, his insight bridging gaps that experience alone had not revealed. Mr. Whitman exhaled, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders, a silent acknowledgement that the balance of knowledge had shifted in favor of a perspective both unexpected and invaluable. Jordan, sensing the shift, adjusted his stance, hands resting lightly on the contract, the tattered strap of his backpack brushing against the floor, a subtle reminder of his background, yet his presence commanded respect. The sunlight continued to stretch across the floor, painting long golden lines across the polished wood, and in that luminous glow, the room held a delicate pause, each person contemplating the implications of the boy's intervention and the choices that lay ahead, the future hanging poised on the edge of his next words and actions. Ms. Langford took a cautious step forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood floor, and Mr. Whitman's gaze remained fixed on Jordan, a mixture of astonishment and reluctant respect etched across his face. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows highlighted the sharp lines of the room, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the boy, emphasizing his small but commanding presence. Jordan's hands rested lightly on the ancient parchment, his posture straight and confident, and he spoke again, this time pointing out a subtle discrepancy in the clauses that could alter the interpretation entirely. Each word deliberate, measured, and precise. The staff exchanged nervous glances, some leaning closer, others holding their breath, all captivated by the boy's clarity and the way he dissected the complex language as if it were a puzzle crafted for him alone. Mr. Whitman tilted his head, listening intently, the crease between his brows deepening as the implications of the hidden clause became clear, his mind racing to reconcile the boy's insight with years of experience and carefully cultivated expertise. Jordan continued, his dark eyes scanning the text, explaining not just what the clauses meant, but how they interacted with one another, the subtle legal nuances that could have been disastrous if overlooked, and every sentence he spoke added weight to his argument, drawing the room deeper into a focused silence that made every sound, the slight scrape of a pen, the soft shuffle of papers, resonate sharply. Ms. Langford's confident composure faltered further as she realized the depth of the boy's understanding, her eyes widening, lips pressing together tightly, while the junior associates leaned forward, their notebooks filled with hurried, precise notes, the room a delicate balance of disbelief and admiration. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, absorbing the full significance of Jordan's observations, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he acknowledged, without a word, the boy's authority on the matter. Jordan paused, allowing the gravity of his findings to settle, his small frame radiating calm assurance, and then gestured toward the final sections, highlighting terms that were easy to overlook but critical to the integrity of the entire agreement. The afternoon sun continued to filter through the blinds, casting golden stripes across the room, illuminating the dust particles that drifted lazily in the still air, each tiny speck suspended in the quiet intensity of the moment. Jordan's explanation was thorough yet concise, his cadence steady, commanding attention without raising his voice, and the boardroom, once filled with the usual hum of business, had transformed into a theater of revelation, every person aware that a child had just demonstrated an insight that surpassed expectation and demanded recognition. Mr. Whitman leaned forward, his fingers lightly resting on the table, his expression shifting from shock to contemplative respect, and for a moment, the room existed solely within the tension between the boy's knowledge and the adult's realization that their understanding had been incomplete until this precise, unexpected intervention. Jordan's eyes met the CEO's. With unwavering confidence, the quiet gravity of his presence leaving an impression that would not soon fade, and as he straightened, the weight of the moment held every person in suspended attention, the room poised on the brink of acknowledgement, anticipation, and the unfolding consequences of a truth revealed. Mr. Whitman finally pushed back from the table, the weight of comprehension settling heavily on his shoulders, and his gaze softened as he looked at Jordan, a quiet awe reflecting in his gray eyes. The sunlight now slanting lower through the tall windows painted stripes across the polished floor, glinting off the metal edges of pens and the smooth surfaces of tablets abandoned in disbelief. Jordan shifted slightly, hands still resting on the ancient contract, the leather strap of his worn backpack creaking softly as he adjusted its position. Ms. Langford stepped back, her confident posture replaced by a subtle tension, acknowledging that the boy's insight could not be dismissed. Mr. Whitman leaned forward once more, his fingers brushing lightly across the pages, tracing the lines Jordan had highlighted, absorbing the full scope of the implications with each deliberate movement. He exhaled slowly, his mind recalibrating, realizing that not only had the contract's hidden pitfalls been revealed, but a new perspective had entered the room, one that could change the course of the agreement entirely. Jordan's voice, steady and clear, outlined the corrective measures, the adjustments needed to preserve the integrity of the contract, and each sentence was delivered with precision that left no room for misinterpretation. The staff remained silent, captivated by the boy's poise and the clarity of his reasoning, the room's atmosphere thick with focused attention and the subtle hum of air circulation. Mr. Whitman's eyes met Jordan's, conveying a recognition of talent and intelligence that words could not fully capture, and in that gaze, a silent agreement formed. This child, despite his youth and circumstances, was now an integral part of the decision-making process. Jordan nodded ever so slightly, acknowledging the trust placed upon him, and then gestured to a section of the contract that would require immediate attention, his fingers steady, deliberate, and confident. The soft rustle of paper, the faint scratch of pens, and the occasional shuffle of feet punctuated the tense yet respectful quiet, each sound emphasizing the significance of the boy's intervention. Mr. Whitman leaned back slightly, allowing the afternoon light to highlight the subtle creases of thought across his face, and with a calm, measured voice, he asked Jordan to walk him through the remaining sections, signaling a shift from doubt to collaboration. The air was filled with anticipation as the room seemed to contract around the moment, every person present acutely aware that they were witnessing not just the unraveling of a complex contract, but the emergence of a young mind whose intelligence and insight demanded recognition. Jordan straightened, a quiet confidence radiating from his small frame, and as he began to guide Mr. Whitman through the final clauses, the golden sunlight caught the edge of the tattered pages, creating a warm glow that seemed to illuminate the boy's presence, a subtle reminder that even in unexpected places, brilliance could shine and alter the course of events in ways no one had anticipated. As the late afternoon light deepened into warm amber, Jordan carefully laid the ancient contract flat on the table, his small hands steady, the worn leather strap of his backpack brushing against the floor. Mr. Whitman leaned closer, his eyes scanning each word with a newfound focus, the tension of uncertainty giving way to cautious respect. Jordan began to point out connections between clauses, explaining the historical context and the subtle phrasing that could be easily misinterpreted, his voice calm but commanding, each syllable deliberate, measured, and clear. The staff around them shifted in their seats, some scribbling notes furiously, others simply watching, captivated by the boy's insight and the precision with which he dissected the complex language. Ms. Langford stood silently, her posture rigid, lips pressed together, realizing that every attempt to challenge or redirect the interpretation was now rendered meaningless in the presence of Jordan's clarity. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the spaces between words, mingling with the faint scratching of pens and the occasional shifting of chairs, all contributing to a heightened sense of anticipation as the boy continued. Jordan's dark eyes met Mr. Whitman's, unwavering, and he highlighted the implications of every subtle term, explaining how small misreadings could cascade into significant consequences, his understanding far surpassing what any adult had anticipated. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, absorbing the gravity of the revelations, the sunlight reflecting off his polished desk and casting long shadows that stretched across the room like silent witnesses to the unfolding scene. The golden light illuminated Jordan's face, accentuating the determination and calm intelligence that radiated from him, a stark contrast to his modest appearance and the worn sneakers that hinted at a life lived on the streets. The contract, once a tangle of confusing terms and near-invisible clauses, now lay fully illuminated under the boy's guidance, the path to clarity made apparent with every precise observation. Jordan gestured to a particularly complex section, tracing the lines with careful fingers as he explained the necessary adjustments, his voice steady and measured, drawing in every listener with the weight of certainty. Mr. Whitman's hand hovered over the contract, poised to act, yet he paused, recognizing that the boy's insight had fundamentally changed the understanding of the document. The room seemed suspended in a delicate balance, each person aware that they were witnessing an extraordinary moment, a young mind revealing a truth that demanded attention and respect. Jordan straightened slightly, the backpack strap resting lightly on his shoulder, and continued to outline the final clauses, his explanations clear, his authority unquestionable, leaving the adults to absorb, adjust, and prepare to respond, the golden light stretching further across the floor as the afternoon edged toward evening. The boardroom filled with a quiet intensity that marked a turning point in the understanding of the contract and the recognition of a remarkable young talent. The boardroom remained tense as Jordan paused, his dark eyes scanning the final clauses, the polished marble reflecting the afternoon sunlight that slanted through the tall windows. Mr. Whitman leaned forward, resting his hands lightly on the table, absorbing every word with a mix of astonishment and cautious deliberation, the subtle creases along his forehead deepening with thought. Jordan's small fingers traced the lines of the contract, pointing out subtle inconsistencies and overlooked terms, his voice calm, yet filled with an authority that seemed to grow with every sentence. The staff remained silent, their pens hovering over notebooks, their breaths held as they tried to grasp the magnitude of the boy's understanding. Ms. Langford, standing near the corner of the room, adjusted her glasses nervously, the confident composure she had displayed earlier now tempered by the undeniable clarity Jordan provided. Each explanation he offered was precise, illuminating the hidden complexities and implications of the text, demonstrating a comprehension that no adult had anticipated. The sunlight caught the edge of the tattered backpack slung over his shoulder, casting a subtle glow that highlighted the contrast between his humble appearance and the brilliance of his insight. Mr. Whitman's chest rose and fell slowly, the weight of realization pressing upon him as he recognized that the boy's observations had not only clarified the contract, but had also prevented a potential misstep of significant consequence. Jordan continued, his voice steady, guiding the CEO and the remaining staff through each nuanced section, the air in the room thick with anticipation and the quiet hum of concentration. The rustle of paper, the soft scratch of pens, and the faint whisper of movements became part of the rhythm of the moment, each sound emphasizing the gravity of the revelations. Mr. Whitman's eyes met Jordan's once more, a subtle nod conveying respect and acknowledgement, while the boy's unwavering gaze reflected a quiet confidence and resilience born from experience beyond his years. The room, bathed in warm light and filled with the scent of polished wood and faintly lingering coffee, seemed suspended in a moment of profound understanding. Every individual acutely aware that they were witnessing not just a correction of the contract, but the emergence of a remarkable mind that demanded attention and consideration. Jordan gestured toward the final critical section, explaining the necessary interpretations and adjustments, his calm demeanor contrasting with the flurry of thoughts racing through the adults around him. The golden light stretched further across the floor, highlighting the dust motes floating lazily in the air as if pausing to watch the extraordinary scene unfold. In the quiet intensity, every person in the room felt the shift. The balance of knowledge had changed, and a boy who had once been overlooked now held the insight to steer the decision in a direction that none had expected, leaving the room poised on the edge of realization, respect, and the unfolding consequences of a truth revealed with remarkable clarity. Jordan straightened, his small frame resolute, and gestured toward a final footnote that had gone unnoticed, the sunlight catching the worn edge of the parchment and illuminating the careful script in a golden glow. Mr. Whitman leaned closer, his fingers lightly touching the table, his eyes scanning the line Jordan indicated, absorbing the subtle detail that had eluded every experienced adult in the room. The quiet hum of the air conditioning blended with the soft rustle of paper as Jordan explained the broader implications of the footnote, how it connected to previous clauses and the consequences of misinterpretation. Each word he spoke carried weight, the clarity of his analysis demanding attention, and the staff shifted uneasily, some leaning forward to follow his reasoning while others sat back, stunned by the precision and depth of understanding. Ms. Langford's lips pressed together tightly, her previous confidence replaced by a recognition of the boy's authority, and even the junior associates felt the shift, the room now fully acknowledging that Jordan's insight was indispensable. The boy's dark eyes met Mr. Whitman's, calm and unwavering, conveying not just knowledge but a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space around him, creating a sense of focus that drew every listener into the rhythm of his words. He highlighted potential pitfalls and subtle ambiguities, his voice deliberate, measured, and perfectly paced to ensure comprehension, the contract now revealing layers of meaning that had been invisible until this moment. The sunlight slanted lower through the tall windows, painting stripes across the polished floor and reflecting softly off pens, tablets, and the glossy surfaces of notepads, each beam accentuating the weight and gravity of the discussion. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, his mind tracing the interconnections Jordan pointed out, the magnitude of the implications settling like a weight he could no longer ignore. Jordan continued to guide him through the final critical points, his explanation weaving historical context, precise translation, and practical consequence into a seamless narrative that held the entire boardroom captive. The boy's presence, humble in appearance yet commanding in intellect, created a silent energy that shifted the atmosphere, the golden light emphasizing the contrast between his youth and the authority his words carried. Every person present felt the profound significance of the moment, the room suspended between disbelief and admiration, all aware that a child had not only revealed what had been hidden, but had also reframed the understanding of an entire agreement. Jordan's final words lingered in the air, deliberate and measured, leaving Mr. Whitman and the staff with a quiet anticipation. The weight of realization and the unfolding consequences of the boy's insight creating a tension that stretched into the late afternoon light, marking a turning point that no one in the room would soon forget. The tension in the boardroom seemed to settle into a focused anticipation as Jordan lifted his gaze from the parchment, his dark brown eyes scanning the room with calm intensity. Mr. Whitman leaned forward, fingers brushing lightly across the polished table, listening with rapt attention, the sunlight through the tall windows casting long golden lines across the floor and catching the edges of scattered documents. Jordan pointed to a subtle notation near the margins, his small finger steady, and explained how the phrasing interacted with other clauses, illuminating connections that had gone unnoticed by even the most experienced adults. His voice remained measured, confident, each word precise and deliberate, drawing the room further into the rhythm of his reasoning. Miss Langford, still standing, adjusted her posture subtly, a tightness in her jaw betraying the tension she felt as she realized her earlier assumptions were no longer valid. The junior associates scribbled rapidly, pens scratching against notepads, the soft rustle of paper punctuating the calm authority Jordan exuded. Every detail he highlighted carried weight, the potential consequences of oversight clear in his explanation, and the adults leaned in, their expressions a mixture of awe, respect, and quiet apprehension. Mr. Whitman's eyes narrowed slightly, absorbing the implications, his mind racing to align decades of experience with the clarity Jordan provided, the subtle interplay between historical context and legal precision unfolding before him. Jordan continued to guide the conversation, referencing nuances and connections with a maturity that belied his age, the air thick with anticipation as every participant absorbed the full scope of his insight. The sunlight angled lower, creating long shadows that stretched across the room, emphasizing the contrast between the boy's small frame and the magnitude of the understanding he commanded. Each pause, each deliberate explanation, heightened the sense of gravity, the room vibrating with a quiet energy that demanded recognition and respect. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, a soft click of his pen punctuating his contemplation, and with careful consideration, he began to nod, acknowledging the accuracy and indispensability of Jordan's observations. Jordan's steady presence filled the space, the worn backpack strap gently brushing the floor, a subtle reminder of his resilience and the life he carried behind his quiet determination. The sunlight continued to catch the edges of the contract, illuminating its contents as Jordan traced critical points with unwavering confidence, and every person present became acutely aware that the boy's intervention had fundamentally altered their understanding of the agreement. The room remained silent except for the soft ambient sounds, each breath held as the implications settled, a shared awareness that they were witnessing a rare and extraordinary insight, and as Jordan paused, a subtle tension lingered, hinting at the transformative decisions now resting in the hands of Mr. Whitman and the remarkable young observer who had guided them through every hidden intricacy of the contract. Jordan lowered the contract gently onto the polished table, his dark brown eyes meeting Mr. Whitman's with quiet confidence, and the sunlight streaming through the tall windows caught the edges of the parchment, casting a warm glow that seemed to spotlight the boy's extraordinary insight. Mr. Whitman leaned forward, resting his hands lightly on the surface, absorbing every word Jordan had explained. The room now completely silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft scratch of pens as the staff jotted down notes. Jordan began to summarize the key points, linking clauses and subtle annotations with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation, his voice calm but precise, each phrase carrying weight and authority beyond his years. Ms. Langford shifted slightly, her composure intact but her expression revealing the recognition of the boy's undeniable mastery, and even the junior associates felt the room's energy change as they leaned in to catch every detail. Jordan gestured toward a final paragraph, explaining its implications in a manner both thorough and accessible, translating the complex language into a sequence of logical conclusions that allowed the adults to see the broader consequences of oversight. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, a subtle nod acknowledging Jordan's brilliance, his mind racing to integrate this new understanding with his decades of experience. The lines of his face softened by the recognition of a perspective previously overlooked. The sunlight lowered further, the golden beams slicing across the floor, highlighting the contrast between the boy's small frame and the enormity of the insight he had delivered, and the polished wood reflected the quiet intensity of the scene. Jordan continued to guide the room through the remaining critical sections, his explanations layered with historical context, precise observations, and the practical effects of each interpretation, each word drawing a collective focus from everyone present. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of awe and respect. Every movement, whether the careful adjustment of a chair, the soft flipping of a page, or the subtle tapping of a pen, amplifying the significance of the moment. Mr. Whitman's eyes never left the boy, a mixture of astonishment, admiration, and contemplation in his gaze, silently conceding that Jordan's insight had altered the course of the decision entirely. Jordan's small hands rested lightly on the table, fingers brushing the worn edges of the parchment, and he paused to let the implications sink in, the room holding its collective breath, aware that the understanding of the contract and the recognition of talent, intelligence, and resilience had reached a pivotal turning point. The sunlight slanted even lower, the shadows stretching across the boardroom, emphasizing the quiet power of the boy's presence. And for a moment, everyone simply absorbed the weight of the revelation, the extraordinary competence of a child transforming the atmosphere from routine procedure into a moment of profound clarity and respect, the final choice now resting with Mr. Whitman, who understood that every decision forward would be shaped by the insight Jordan had revealed in the space of an afternoon. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted as Jordan carefully pointed to a series of interrelated clauses, his voice calm but imbued with certainty, each word resonating with a clarity that drew the attention of every person present. Mr. Whitman leaned back slightly, the weight of realization settling into his posture as he processed the depth of the boy's insight, the sunlight through the tall windows casting golden streaks across the polished floor and illuminating the edges of the contract with a soft glow. Jordan continued, highlighting subtle discrepancies and hidden implications that could have gone unnoticed, explaining the historical context of the language and the rationale behind each phrasing, his explanations precise and deliberate. Ms. Langford shifted uncomfortably, her composed demeanor giving way to a quiet acknowledgement that Jordan's comprehension had outpaced the experience of any adult in the room. The junior associates scribbled notes furiously, pens scratching lightly, the soft rustle of paper filling the quiet spaces between Jordan's words as he navigated the final sections, drawing connections and clarifying interpretations with a maturity and confidence that seemed impossible for someone of his age. Mr. Whitman's eyes remained fixed on the boy, a mixture of admiration, contemplation, and cautious respect reflected in his expression, silently recognizing that Jordan's intervention had transformed their understanding of the entire contract. Jordan gestured to the concluding passages, explaining how each minor detail interlinked with previous clauses and the potential consequences if overlooked, his calm demeanor commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The afternoon sun slanted lower, casting long shadows across the boardroom, emphasizing the gravity of the moment and highlighting the contrast between the boy's small frame and the monumental importance of his insight. Each pause, each measured phrase, seemed to amplify the significance of the scene, the quiet intensity wrapping around the room as the adults absorbed the full extent of what had been revealed. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, leaning forward, fingers brushing lightly across the surface of the table, his mind aligning decades of professional experience with the clarity of Jordan's perspective. The boy's dark brown eyes met the CEO's, steady and unwavering, conveying not only knowledge but a calm assurance that demanded recognition, and for a moment, the room existed in a suspended tension, the weight of understanding balanced delicately in the air. Jordan finished outlining the final interpretations, his voice steady and authoritative, and the staff and executives alike held their collective breath, realizing that a child had unveiled a profound truth, guiding them toward a resolution they had not anticipated. The sunlight stretched across the floor in warm golden lines, illuminating dust motes drifting lazily in the air, and in that luminous glow, the boardroom remained captivated, aware that they had witnessed a rare and extraordinary insight, the outcome now hinging on the comprehension and decisions of those present, and the quiet power of Jordan's presence lingered, leaving an indelible impression of intelligence, precision, and unexpected brilliance. The tension in the boardroom eased slightly as Jordan folded his hands over the ancient contract, his small fingers brushing lightly against the worn edges, and his dark brown eyes met Mr. Whitman's with calm assurance. The sunlight now cast a softer glow through the tall windows, painting the polished floor in warm golden hues, and every person present felt the shift in atmosphere as comprehension settled over the room. Mr. Whitman exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, a subtle nod acknowledging the depth and clarity of the boy's insight, while Jordan continued to speak with steady, deliberate precision, summarizing the key corrections and implications with a maturity that belied his age. Ms. Langford shifted her stance, lips pressed together, quietly accepting that the boy's reasoning had revealed truths that none had anticipated, her professional composure now tempered by the undeniable accuracy of his observations. The junior associates leaned forward, scribbling notes with careful, precise movements, their pens scratching softly against paper, capturing every subtle detail as Jordan outlined the critical measures needed to preserve the integrity of the agreement. Mr. Whitman's gaze remained locked on the boy, a mixture of admiration, contemplation, and a dawning respect evident in his expression, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only sound punctuating the intensity of the moment. Jordan gestured toward a final margin note, explaining the potential cascading effects if misinterpreted, his voice calm and authoritative, each word deliberate, measured, and clear. The sunlight angled lower, the shadows stretching across the polished floor, highlighting the contrast between the boy's small frame and the significance of his intervention, the worn strap of his backpack catching the light as a subtle emblem of resilience. Every clause he referenced, every nuance he clarified, drew the attention of the room further into a shared focus, the adults captivated by the combination of precision, clarity, and quiet confidence emanating from someone so young. Mr. Whitman slowly nodded, tracing the lines Jordan highlighted, feeling the weight of understanding deepen with each explanation, recognizing that the contract's full meaning had been brought to light by the boy's insight. Jordan's calm demeanor and measured speech drew in every listener, the energy in the room charged with a mixture of awe, respect, and anticipation as the final implications of the contract settled into view. The golden sunlight illuminated the dust particles drifting lazily in the air, marking the passage of time and quiet observation of the extraordinary clarity Jordan had provided, and every adult present sensed that they were witnessing not just the resolution of a complex agreement, but the emergence of a remarkable talent whose intelligence and poise commanded recognition. Leaving the room poised on the threshold of informed action, respect, and the subtle transformation brought about by the boy's extraordinary understanding. Jordan finally stepped back, his small hands folded neatly in front of him, the sunlight now dipping low, casting long amber streaks across the polished boardroom floor, and every person present felt the weight of the moment settle like a gentle but undeniable authority. Mr. Whitman leaned back in his chair, a slow exhale escaping his lips as he processed the full scope of what had been revealed, his eyes reflecting a mixture of astonishment, admiration, and contemplation. The ancient contract lay, open on the table, illuminated by the fading light. Each clause and margin note now understood fully, thanks to Jordan's precise guidance and unwavering focus. Ms. Langford, who had stood silently, now acknowledged the depth of the boy's insight, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she realized that no challenge or assertion could diminish the clarity and accuracy of his observations. The junior associates, notebooks filled with detailed notes, glanced around the room, their pens resting for a moment as they absorbed the extraordinary demonstration of understanding and composure from someone so young. Jordan's dark brown eyes swept across the room, steady and calm, conveying not just knowledge but the quiet authority of someone who had been underestimated and now commanded recognition without raising his voice. The sunlight catching the edges of the tattered backpack and worn sneakers highlighted the contrast between his humble appearance and the remarkable clarity of his mind. Every subtle inflection in his voice, every deliberate gesture toward the contract, drew the room further into a shared understanding, the soft rustle of paper and the occasional scratch of a pen punctuating the stillness of awe. Mr. Whitman's gaze lingered, the tension of earlier uncertainty replaced with trust, as he nodded slowly, acknowledging that the boy's intervention had fundamentally reshaped their comprehension of the agreement. Jordan continued for a few final moments, explaining how each clause interconnected and the consequences of misreading them, his voice calm, precise, and deliberate, allowing every adult in the room to follow his reasoning without distraction. The golden light stretched across the floor, emphasizing the gravity of the scene and the quiet authority of a child whose intellect and courage had guided the boardroom through complexity with remarkable poise. As Jordan stepped fully back from the table, the room seemed to breathe collectively, the tension dissipating into a quiet reverence for what had been revealed, every individual acutely aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a young boy transforming understanding, earning respect, and leaving a lasting impression that would shape decisions far beyond the afternoon. The sunlight fading slowly as the boardroom embraced the shift in perspective, the acknowledgement of brilliance, and the promise of change that had begun with the quiet determination of one small, resolute figure.